Today I'm going to tell you a story so raw and quiet, it'll stay with you long after the fire dies down. A tale of two broken souls who met in the teeth of a Wyoming winter so cruel, even the wolves stayed quiet. It's the kind of story that starts with a single fall in the snow, one ordinary moment that ends up changing everything. Out there in the high lonesome, where the wind cuts like a knife and fate don't ask permission, two strangers crossed paths, and nothing was ever the same again. Before we ride into this one, hit that like button if you're ready, and drop a comment. Where are you tuning in from tonight? The winter of 1892 clamped down on Willow Canyon like an iron trap, cold and merciless, where even the wind held its breath in fear. Heavy snow blanketed the valley floor, stretching from the crimson bluffs to the iced-over creek like a vast white burial cloth. In this god-forsaken corner of the Arizona Territory, winter didn't creep in soft-footed. It rode in snarling, fangs bared, showing no pity. Right in the heart of that lonesome canyon stood one weathered homestead, dark timbers scarred by endless sun, gales, and grief. Smoke rose thin and reluctant from the chimney. The yard lay dead quiet, except for the uneasy stamping of horses, their warm breaths curling like pale spirits into the freezing dawn. A deep melancholy hung over the place, the sort of stillness that whispers a strong heart once thumped here, steady and true, until it quit too damn soon. Inside lived Talon Blackthorn, a 38-year-old man whose broad shoulders bore burdens heavier than any blizzard could pile on. Folks across 3 counties once called him the finest Apache horse trainer this side of the Mogollon Rim. A man whose deep laugh rolled over the pastures, whose steady hands gentled the wildest Mustang into quiet trust. But sorrow had gouged deep tracks in him. 2 winters back, Sparrow, his wife, slipped away in a fever no remedy could break. Since then, Talon shared his days with the horses, an old hound named Ruckus, and ghosts that clung tighter than the frost. He still carried Sparrow's turquoise charm against his chest under the shirt, never removing it, never letting its warmth touch another living soul. That morning, Talon woke to fire raging inside him, a fever swelling like floodwater. He shoved it down hard. The horses had to eat, and a lone man out here had no truck with weakness. Never had, never would. He cinched his coat tight, stepped into the razor-sharp dawn, and willed himself across the yard. The edges of the world blurred, but he kept on, boots crunching snow with each labored stride. Every step dragged heavier, the horses waiting with heads tossing, nostrils flaring. They knew something was wrong. He muttered their names, voice rough and ragged, breath hitching. His hand shook on the feed bucket. Then the fever hit like a hammer. Talon reeled, sky spinning, cold surging up to claim him. The bucket tumbled, grain scattering across the snow like shattered stars. Ruckus barked once, sharp and frantic. The horses wheeled in tight circles, their whinnies piercing the brittle air. Talon fought to rise, arms failing him, darkness crowding in thick and final at the corners of his sight. He crumpled into the drifts, and everything went still. That's where the real tale kicks off, partner. A low storm hung heavy over Willow Canyon that morning, gray as gunmetal draped across the sky. Out along the narrow trail twisting between frozen ridges, a solitary woman guided her mule slow and careful through the deep snow. Her name was Wren Calder, and she'd traveled a long, hard road to reach this valley, farther in miles than most folks could fathom, and deeper still in heartache. Wren Calder had ridden farther than any map could measure, carrying grief heavier than the miles themselves. At 34, she was a traveling nurse out of Kansas, widowed nearly a year now. Her husband had been crushed in a Topeka rail accident, And when he went, the whole world she'd built went quiet and dark. She'd sold the house, crammed the remnants of their life into a battered trunk, and pointed west, searching for anything that might let her draw a full breath again. A recent letter from an Apache camp tucked near Willow Canyon had changed her course. They needed help at their little clinic. She needed a reason to keep going. Sometimes that simple exchange, need for need, was all two people had left to barter. That morning she rode easy, gloved fingers firm on the reins, humming a low tune under her breath. The trail felt almost peaceful in its stark way. Snow-laden pines standing sentinel along the ridge, sharp cold nipping her cheeks. She wasn't happy, not quite, but the ache inside had eased to something bearable for the first time in months. Then the sound sliced through the stillness, a high, frantic whinny, followed by another. Horses. Wren yanked the mule to a halt. The wind carried it again, sharper now, terrified screams bouncing off rock walls. This wasn't morning chatter. This was panic. Her heart kicked hard. She clucked to the mule, swung off the trail, and plunged toward the noise. Snow stung her face as she broke into the open basin. There, past a leaning split-rail fence, 4 horses wheeled in tight, frantic circles. At the center lay a dark shape, sprawled motionless in the drifts. Wren's breath froze in her throat. "Dear God," she whispered. She dropped from the saddle, boots plunging deep, and ran. The horses shied but held ground, almost pleading for her to hurry. When she dropped to her knees beside the fallen man, the sight hit her like a fist. Fever-red skin against the white cold, frost thick on his lashes, his hair, the collar of his coat. His breathing came in shallow, wet rasps, like a man drowning in open air. She pressed a shaking hand to his forehead. Burning. "Sir, can you hear me?" No answer, not even a twitch. She glanced around, breath clouding in frantic bursts. Nothing but the lonely cabin nearby, windows black, chimney barely smoking. She wasn't big, but she'd dragged broken miners from cave-ins and carried fever-struck kids across howling prairies. Sorrow had softened her heart. Hardship had forged iron in her spine. "All right," she muttered to herself. "You're not checking out in this snow. Not on my watch." She hooked her hands under his arms, dug her heels in, and pulled. He was dead weight, solid muscle, long limbs, but she gritted her teeth and hauled him inch by stubborn inch toward the cabin. She slipped twice, once crashing to her knees, palms stinging on ice, lungs screaming. Each time she shoved upright and kept going. The horses trailed close, circling protectively, hooves churning snow. By the time she reached the door, her arms trembled like cottonwood leaves in a gale, and her chest burned. She rammed the door open with her hip, half dragging, half lifting him inside. The cabin was colder than the outdoors. No fire, no heat, just a cot, a cold stove, and the hollow echo of a life left empty too long. "Good Lord," she breathed, easing him onto the cot. "How long have you been battling this by yourself?" She stripped off his frost-crusted coat. There, against his chest, hung a turquoise charm. Simple, worn smooth by years of touch. Something twisted sharp in her heart. This man had loved someone once. Loved her fierce and true. Now he was alone, sliding toward the edge. She shook off the ache, dug into her satchel for herbs, clean cloths, the battered tin of salve she carried everywhere. Her voice dropped soft, steadying herself as much as him. "Hang on, partner. I'm gonna get air back in those lungs." She kindled the stove, set water to boil, soaked cloths in the warmth, and laid them along his neck. Steam curled up, carrying the clean scent of willow bark and cedar through the room. His breathing stuttered, then smoothed. Still faint, but there. Wren brushed frost from his dark hair with a gentleness that surprised even her. "You're safe now," she murmured. Outside, the horses settled. The storm eased its howl, and for the first time in too many lonely months, a faint spark of hope flickered awake inside that frozen cabin. Time stretched thin. The only sounds were the stove's soft pops and the ragged, stubborn rhythm of a man clawing back from the brink. Wren Calder stayed right there, coat thrown over a chair, hands locked around a tin cup gone stone cold hours before. She'd meant to rest, but every time her eyes drifted shut, she jerked awake, terrified the next breath might be his last. Then, a small shift. Barely there, but real. The man on the cot stirred. His brow creased, breath catching as he fought up through fever's grip. Wren leaned in, pulse thudding soft against her ribs. "Easy now," she whispered. "You're all right." His eyelids fluttered once, twice, then opened slow. Dark eyes met hers, clouded, exhausted, carrying a sorrow etched bone deep. For a long beat, Talon Blackthorn said nothing. Fragments drifted through his mind. Snow, horses, falling. He blinked hard, piecing together the room, the woman, the face hovering above him like a steady lamp in endless dark. "Where?" His voice cracked, raw as gravel. "You're in your own cabin," Wren answered gently. "You went down outside. The horses brought me to you." He swallowed, tried to sit up. Dizziness slammed him back. Wren lifted a hand, not sharp, just firm. "Don't fight it. The fever's still got teeth in you." Talon studied her through uneven breaths. A stranger. A woman he'd never laid eyes on, sitting calm by his fire like she belonged. Yet her being here didn't feel like trespass. It felt like rescue. "You dragged me in," he rasped, voice thick. "I did," she said simply, "and I aim to keep you drawing breath a while longer." A faint puff of air escaped him. Almost a laugh, though it cost him. Smiling hurt, but her straight talk warmed a place inside that had been ice for years. Wren stood, working the stiffness from her back, and crossed to the shelf above the table. Hunting for another blanket, her eyes caught on something small, polished smooth by time. A dark mesquite flute, etched with two birds soaring free. She paused, speaking half to herself. "That's a fine piece." Talon's gaze followed hers. Something flinched inside him. He drew a slow, painful breath. "It was my wife's," he said quietly. Wren went still. She turned, apology already softening her eyes. "I didn't mean to pry." "It's all right." He closed his eyes a moment, steadying. "Her name was Sparrow. She carved it. Said the birds reminded her of flying free." His voice dropped to a whisper. "She left us 2 winters back. The cabin filled with a silence so gentle it felt like fresh snow falling." Wren set the blanket down. Her hands felt suddenly heavy. "I'm so sorry," she said, and he heard the truth in it. Not pity, but the knowing of someone who'd walked the same road. Talon looked at her closer this time. Grief shadowed her eyes too. Quiet, veiled, like a candle glowing behind fogged glass. "You've lost somebody," he murmured. She didn't flinch. "Yes," the word came out soft, like she hadn't let it loose in a long spell. "My husband. Last spring." For a heartbeat, neither moved. 2 strangers in a snow-buried cabin, tied by wounds neither had meant to share. Wren set the flute back on the shelf with a touch so careful it felt almost holy. "I never met her," she whispered, "but I can see plain as day. She was your whole world. Still is." Talon's voice came thick, raw with truth. "She was, and I'm still stuck figuring out what to do with the part where it ends." She met his eyes, steady and kind. We all carry that weight for a while, some longer than others. He gave a small, tired shake of his head from the cot, still pale as fresh snow. You won't make it far in this blow, he murmured. Not today. I don't want to wear out my welcome, Wren said gently. You've already been more than kind. A faint, weary smile pulled at the corner of his mouth. Honest, though it cost him. Miss Calder, if you step out into that storm, I'll have to crawl after you just to haul you back in, and I ain't in any shape to play hero right now. Wren let out a soft laugh, despite herself, the sound surprising even her. Then I reckon I'll stay, if only to keep from giving you extra work. He closed his eyes and gave a slow nod. Thank you. And so she stayed. The hours eased into a quiet rhythm, the kind two strangers almost never find unless fate shoves them together and says, stay put. Wren kept the stove fed, brewing strong herb teas that scented the cabin with cedar and willow. Every time she propped Talon up to sip, he'd mutter an apology. She'd brush it off polite but firm, like tending him was the most ordinary thing in the world. Once, thick smoke suddenly poured from the stovepipe, stinging their eyes with a sharp, acrid bite. Wren coughed, fanning the air. Lord Almighty, what did I do now? Talon managed a weak chuckle that turned into a cough of his own. You choked it. Fire's gotta breathe same as anything else. She raised an eyebrow, teasing. Everything needs to breathe, huh? Everything worth keeping alive does, he murmured. With effort, he eased off the cot and knelt beside the stove. Here, watch. His hands moved sure and slow, stacking the split wood in a loose crisscross so air could flow. Wren watched the quiet confidence in every motion, like he was talking an old friend back from the brink. In moments, a clean, bright flame caught and steadied. There, he said, easing back against the wall. Now she'll burn even. Wren smiled wide. Well, I'll be. All I needed was a good teacher. Later, she stepped outside to check on the horses. The cold slapped her cheeks hard. Snow swirled soft in lazy spirals around the corral. The animals huffed warm plumes into the air, ears flicking forward as she came near. She spoke to them low and soothing, the same gentle tone she'd used on scared young ones in prairie tent clinics. To her quiet surprise, the tall bay mare stretched out her neck and nudged Wren's shoulder. Wren laughed under her breath and rubbed the soft muzzle. Back inside, Talon watched her through the frost-rimmed window, a small, bundled figure moving easy among his horses, like she'd always belonged there. Something tightened in his chest, small and sharp and dangerous. When she stamped back in, shaking snow from her boots, Ruckus, the old hound who hadn't left Talon's side in months, lifted his head, sniffed the winter on her coat, then padded over and curled right at her feet. Wren looked down, surprised. Well now, didn't figure on making a friend that quick? Talon stared, stunned. He don't warm up to folks easy. Animals smell kindness, she said simply. Sometimes quicker than people do. He didn't argue. Late that afternoon, with the storm moaning low outside, Wren stood at the stove stirring a pot of broth. Cabin light had faded to soft gray. Snowflakes pressed against the window like delicate lace. Without thinking, she started to hum. Soft at first, then clearer. An old hymn, gentle as prairie wind through tall grass, the kind sung in little wooden churches on Sunday mornings. The tune drifted through the room like warm breath on a cold day. Talon went still on the cot. His eyes snapped open, suddenly sharp. That song, he whispered. Wren turned, wooden spoon in hand. I'm sorry. Did I bother you? No. His voice came thick, but not from fever this time. It's just, Sparrow used to hum that. My wife. He paused, breath catching rough. I ain't heard it since she went. Wren's face softened. My mama hummed it too. Said she learned it from an Apache woman she nursed through a bad winter years back. Talon held her gaze a long moment. The quiet stretched, thick enough to feel the air itself shift between them. Maybe, he said at last, voice low. Some songs know when it's time to come back around. Talon murmured low, eyes still on the pot she stirred. Some songs know exactly when to come home again. Wren glanced down at the bubbling broth, spoon moving slow circles. Maybe they do. Outside, the storm kept up its steady, pounding beat against the shingles, like a drum that refused to quit. But inside those four walls, something new was stirring, something warmer, quieter, as delicate as the little flame dancing in the stove. Two people who'd never planned to cross paths, lashed together by griefs they hadn't invited, started letting small pieces of themselves show. Not in a rush, not with fanfare, just the way snow slides off a tin roof. One quiet drop at a time, steady and patient. Healing hadn't arrived yet, not fully. But you could hear its boots on the trail, coming closer. By week's end, Talon Blackthorn could finally stand without clutching the bedpost like a lifeline. The fever had cracked and broken. A faint flush of color crept back into his cheeks. Tentative, like the first pale streak of dawn, unsure if it was welcome. Wren watched him test the floorboards, moving careful around the cabin, feeling out his own strength, the room, himself. She crossed her arms when he reached for his coat. You're still wobbly as a newborn colt. I've sat long enough, he answered, sliding arms into sleeves with deliberate care. You mentioned that clinic down in the settlement needs eyes on it. If you're bound and determined to go, then I'm bound and determined to ride along, he finished for her. She studied the set of his jaw, the stubborn line that said argument was pointless. After a beat, she let out a breath. All right, but if you keel over, I ain't hauling you back this time. His mouth twitched, almost a grin. Fair enough. They stepped out into a world scrubbed fresh by snow and sharp sunlight. The big blow had moved on, but the deep cold still hung in the air like a promise. Breath plumed white in front of them as they headed down the trail. Ruckus trotted alongside, tail swinging, until Talon gave him a quiet word and pointed back to the porch. The old hound paused, ears up, caught between loyalty and curiosity, then finally dropped down by the steps with a resigned huff. The settlement sat half a mile off, scattered clusters of low lodges and cabins, thin smoke curling lazy from stovepipes into the blue. What Wren didn't yet know, what Talon hoped she wouldn't feel until it was too late, was that this quiet valley carried old memories and harder judgments. Things winter's snow couldn't cover forever. As they turned onto the little market road, heads began to turn. Slow at first, then deliberate. Wren sensed it before she could name it, the air thickening, tightening around them like a noose pulled just snug. Mothers tugged their little ones closer to skirts. Two older men stacking crates by the livery stopped cold, eyes flat and unreadable. Outside the mercantile, two women leaned heads together, their whispers cut through the chill, sharp as sewing needles. Talon, Wren said under her breath. He kept walking, jaw locked tight, shoulders rigid. He'd worn this feeling since he was a boy, like an old coat he couldn't shake off. They reached the general store. A thin man in a brown vest was sweeping snow off the steps. He froze mid-swing when Wren stepped up, broom dangling in the air. Morning, she said, voice warm as ever. I need to pick up a few things. Tonics, bandages, whatever you've got. The clinic's running low. The man's eyes flicked from her face to Talon standing just behind, then back again. "Ain't got nothing for sale today," he muttered. Wren blinked. "Sign says you're open." He leaned heavy on the broom handle. "Open, just not for everybody." Heat rose quiet but steady in Wren's chest. "Sir, this man stood with me through a storm that damn near killed him. He's done nothing to you or anybody else." Nearby, a woman let out a soft scoff. Another voice hissed low. "That nurse shacking up with that half-breed. Shameless." The whispers kept coming, sharp and low. "It's downright shameful." Talon never lifted his eyes to meet Wren's. His stare stayed fixed on the snow at his boots, where each breath he let out bloomed white, then vanished, like shame itself couldn't bear to linger. He turned to her at last, voice pitched so low it scraped. "We ought to go. This ain't worth the fight." Wren drew herself up straight, chin tilting just enough to show steel. She swept her gaze across the ring of silent faces, some iced over, some curious, some wearing quiet cruelty like a badge. Her backbone stiffened like fence wire in a freeze. "I don't scare easy when trouble comes calling," she said, soft but steady. Talon shut his eyes for a beat, as though her words landed both like balm and like a fresh bruise. When they turned from the store and started back down the trail, the murmurs chased after them, drifting like acrid smoke on the wind. Talon pulled a couple steps ahead, shoulders hunched tight, his silence roaring louder than any shout he could have thrown. Wren lengthened her stride to catch him. "Talon, hold up." He stopped, but he didn't turn around. His breath shook visible in the cold air. "You don't have to stand up for me," he said quiet. "You shouldn't have to carry the weight that trails my name." She stepped right up beside him, close enough to make him face her. "We all drag shadows behind us," she answered, voice gentle yet unyielding. "Yours don't put any fear in me." His jaw flexed like he wanted to push back hard, but the argument bled out of him slow. The hard lines carved into his face eased, replaced by something raw. Gratitude, maybe, or grief, or the shaky first threads of trust taking root. A gust swept snow across the path, dusting their coats, their boots, the sudden quiet hanging between them. Wren reached out, let her hand rest light against his sleeve. Just a second, not bold enough to shout anything to the world, but long enough to say, "I'm right here." Side by side, they walked on toward Willow Canyon. The town kept right on judging. The whispers kept circling like crows. But down low and steady, something tougher was rising between them. Trouble slipped into Willow Canyon the way bad news does. Quiet, easy to overlook unless you'd learned to listen for it. Wren felt the first whisper of it when a boy no more than 6 tugged her sleeve as she passed through the settlement. His little cheeks burned red with fever, breaths coming quick and shallow. "Auntie Wren," he whispered, the sweet nickname the kids had given her since the big snow. "My chest hurts bad." She dropped to one knee right there in the snow, laid her palm to his forehead. Her heart squeezed tight. The heat poured off him like an open forge. "Where's your mama, sweetheart?" she asked, keeping her voice level even as her pulse hammered. Before the boy could answer, a rough cough ripped through the air nearby, then another, harsher. A woman staggered out of a nearby lodge, clutching the doorframe, eyes glassy and far away. "Talon!" Wren said sharp, already on her feet. "Something's gone wrong." And it had. By the time the sun dropped low, the truth was plain and ugly. Children wheezed like bellows with holes. Elders shook with bone-deep chills. Young men doubled over, coughing so hard it sounded like their ribs might crack. The sickness moved fast. Merciless, Wren ran for the little makeshift clinic, heart slamming against her ribs. She needed herbs, clean bandages, anything to fight the fever down. But when she reached the door, a rider sat waiting, one of the territorial doctor's assistants, arms crossed. "I need supplies," she said, breathless. "Your doctor has to come quick." The man didn't move a muscle. "Doc ain't riding out for reservation sickness," he said flat. "Orders." The words struck Wren like a slap of winter wind. She stood frozen a second, then whispered, "Talon's people are dying." "Children are dying," Wren whispered, voice cracking on the words. "Not my concern," the man said, flat as a board. He swung up into the saddle, wheeled his horse, and rode off without so much as a glance back. She stood there in the churned-up snow, the flat refusal ringing in her ears like a slammed door. No point wasting breath on argument. She spun and ran straight for Talon. He was already cutting through the camp at a fast clip, arms loaded with blankets, water buckets, whatever he could grab. "I'm going in," she said, breathless. "I know." No hesitation in his answer. "You don't have to." "I do." He cut in gentle but sure. "Not just because you're heading there, because these are my people." Their eyes locked for one fierce heartbeat, two tempests colliding in broad daylight. Then they plunged straight into the sickness together. The next hours melted into a blur of frantic motion and iron will. Wren dropped to her knees beside a coughing elder, pressing cool, damp cloths to his burning face, murmuring soft comforts even as her own hands trembled. Talon hauled water from the well in endless trips, chopped wood for the steam tents, lifted patients too weak to move. Sweat rolled down his brow, but he never once faltered. In one dim tent, a baby cried, thin and weak. Wren rushed over, scooped the tiny bundle, wrapped it tight in blankets warmed by the fire. The mother wept quietly beside her. "Shh, little one," Wren soothed, rocking gently. "You're safe now. I've got you." As she rose, two small girls latched onto her skirts, tear-streaked faces upturned, tiny fingers knotted in the wool. "Auntie Wren, don't go." "I'm right here, sweethearts," she whispered. "I ain't leaving." Across the firelight, Talon watched her, the way she bent but never broke, the way she walked straight into fear like it was an old enemy she'd faced 100 times. Flames caught in her hair, lit the fierce set of her jaw, the steady rhythm of her hands. Deep inside him, something stirred, quiet, powerful, like a banked ember finally catching breath. By the second night, exhaustion dragged at Wren like lead weights. Her back screamed, her feet felt like they'd been chiseled from granite. She'd worked straight through, mixing poultices, cooling hot skin, coaxing shallow breaths into something stronger. Talon came back from the far edge of camp, shoulders drenched from water hauling, and found her slumped against a lodge post outside the biggest tent. Her eyelids drooped, fluttering. "Wren," he said soft. She blinked, tried to stand straight, swayed hard. He caught her before she hit dirt, arms strong and careful around her. "You need rest," he murmured. "I can't. They need—" He cupped the back of her head just enough to steady her, voice low and unyielding. "You don't carry this by yourself." Her breath caught. She looked up at him, eyes tired, glazed, but easing into something like surrender. "Neither do you." For a long moment they stood there, two worn-out souls holding each other upright in the fire-glowed dusk. Around them the camp went quiet, except for the crackle of flames and far-off coughing. Then Talon eased her down to sit, wrapped a thick blanket around her shoulders, and stayed close until her breathing slowed and deepened into real sleep. Dawn came. The camp still lay heavy under sickness, but hope glinted faint in the eyes of those who'd made it through the dark hours. Side by side, his raw strength, her steady skill, Talon and Wren braced for another day, ready to fight whatever the fever threw next. Together. On the fourth day, the sickness showed its teeth. Wren stood at the bedside of old Mother Sagebrush, one of the oldest, most respected voices in the settlement. Her silver hair caught the faint lodge light like frost on a winter branch. Her hands, thin, knotted from decades of weaving tight baskets and spinning long tails, lay still now. Those eyes, once sparkling with sly mischief, had gone dull. The spark behind them guttered like a candle fighting a cold draft. Wren had thrown everything she knew at the sickness. Cool compresses changed every few minutes, strong willow bark tea brewed just right, steam tents thick with cedar smoke, careful drops of the potent tinctures she'd carried all the way from Kansas. Talon had never left the old woman's side through the long night, sitting cross-legged on the dirt floor, murmuring low prayers in his native tongue. His deep voice rolled soft as fresh snow falling. But sometimes the hardest fight slams up against a wall too tall to scale. Just after sunrise, when the sky over the ridges turned the pale gray of washed-out denim, old Mother Sagebrush's breathing eased. The harsh rattle in her chest smoothed into shallow sighs. Then, silence. Her thin fingers slipped from Wren's grip, light as a dry leaf letting go of its branch. And then, nothing. For one endless heartbeat, the whole world seemed to stop breathing. Wren stared at the quiet form on the pallet. Her own hands shook hard enough to blur her vision. Her chest squeezed tight, like someone had cinched a rawhide rope around her ribs. Every sound around her faded to a dull, hollow ring. She'd been so damn sure. If she just pushed harder, stayed awake longer, cared fierce enough, she could pull them all through. But here, in the dim, smoky light of the lodge, an old woman lay still, and no skill, no love, no amount of stubborn will could call her back. A cruel voice hissed inside her head, one she knew too well. You failed. You always fail the ones who count. She took a step back. Fingers curled into white-knuckled fists, throat burning. I should have done more, she whispered, the words barely making it out. Talon, standing across the low room, heard the crack in her voice like a rifle shot. He crossed the packed earth floor in 3 long strides and stopped beside her. His eyes rested one last time on old Mother Sagebrush, respectful, grieving, before turning to Wren. You did everything a body could do, he said quiet. It wasn't enough. The words broke on her tongue. She trusted me to help her, trusted me to keep her here, and I... Her breath hitched, ragged. I couldn't save her. Talon's hand hovered a second, like he wasn't sure he had any right, then settled over hers. His calloused fingers were warm, steady, trembling just a little. We don't get to decide who stays and who rides on, he said low. We only walk beside them as far as the trail lets us. Tears filled Wren's eyes fast, blurring his face into soft shadow. I came out here so I wouldn't have to watch people die anymore, she confessed, voice raw. But they keep slipping away anyway. He squeezed her hand, his own voice roughening. And I stayed put because I didn't know how to live without the dead riding shotgun. She looked up at him, startled, truth hanging naked between them. I came running from grief, she whispered. Talon held her gaze, the weight of his own admission pressing heavy in the air. I've been living right in the middle of it. For a long moment the loss wrapped around them. The still air, the motionless body of a woman loved and lost, drawing them closer in a way no words ever could. Their wounds lay open, unguarded, mirroring each other like reflections in black water. In that fragile quiet, grief stopped being a solitary jail cell. It became something shared. Talon's thumb moved slow across the back of her hand, unsteady but deliberate. "We honor her by fighting for the ones still breathing," he said softly. "She'd tell you to get up, keep moving." Wren swallowed hard, forced air into her lungs. "Then that's what we'll do," she whispered. "For her." Outside, the wind shifted. Not a full turn yet, but enough. A small promise that even in this valley of sorrow, courage still stood guard. If the fourth day had brought loss, the fifth and sixth days finally cracked open the door to real hope. It crept in slow, almost shy, like dawn after a long black night. At first the changes were small, easy to overlook if you weren't paying close attention. A little boy who'd lain limp and silent for 2 full nights suddenly opened his eyes and croaked for water. An old man whose cough had shaken the lodge walls all week at last slept straight through, chest rising and falling steady. No more frantic gasps every few minutes. By the morning of the 6th day, Wren stood in the heart of the settlement and felt it. The tide had turned. The sharp cries of pain had quieted to murmurs. The coughing spells came less savage, less desperate. The air still hung heavy with weariness, but underneath ran something new, a thin current of relief, fragile as the first green blade pushing through melting snow. She made her rounds one lodge at a time, Talon right beside her. They checked temperatures with the backs of hands, tucked blankets tighter, spoke low words of encouragement that carried more weight than medicine. Children spotted them coming and reached out eager, small hands grabbing fistfuls of Wren's skirts. "Auntie Wren," one girl piped up proudly, "I can breathe better today." She pulled in an exaggerated lungful of air just to prove it, cheeks puffed out like a chipmunk. Wren laughed, a real surprised sound that bubbled up unexpected and bright. "That's the sweetest thing I've heard in weeks, darlin'." Talon watched from a step behind, quiet wonder in his eyes. The way folks looked at Wren now had changed. No more wary glances or guarded suspicion. What shone back was warmth born of deep gratitude and hard-won respect. They'd seen her work without pausing for sleep, stand firm against fear without flinching, grieve right alongside them instead of from some safe distance. And they'd seen Talon, too, hauling water till his shoulders screamed, lending his broad back to carry those too weak to stand, sitting cross-legged with terrified little ones and soothing them in the old tongue that felt like home. None of it had gone unseen. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the ridges and washed the snow-dusted valley in soft gold and rose, the Apache Council called everyone to gather. A big fire roared at the center, sparks snapping up into the deepening twilight like tiny stars breaking free. Villagers stepped out from their lodges wrapped in heavy blankets, faces lined with fatigue, but lit with cautious hope. Wren stood at the edge of the circle, suddenly uncertain, fingers twisting the fringe of her shawl. Talon stood beside her, one hand resting easy on his belt, shoulders square in that quiet, rooted way of his, like a tall cedar that's weathered every storm and still stands. The council leader stepped into the firelight. His long hair, streaked heavy with gray, moved in the evening breeze. His eyes stayed sharp, even through the deep weariness carved into his frame. 6 days ago, he began, voice deep and rolling out over the silent crowd like distant thunder. This valley shook under the grip of sickness. We watched our children fight for every breath. We feared our elders would never greet another dawn. He paused, letting the quiet honor the ones they'd almost lost. But we weren't left to face it alone. He turned, eyes settling on Wren and Talon. These two stood with us in the storm. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the people, emotion held tight but trembling just under the surface. Wren Calder came to us a stranger, a white woman from far-off lands. Some of us doubted, some judged. But when the fever struck hard, she knelt in our lodges, held our children close, and battled for every breath they drew. Wren felt heat rush to her face, throat closing tight. She'd never chased praise, only life. Being seen like this, honored in front of them all, left her speechless. And Talon Blackthorn, the leader continued, turning to him, has always been one of us. But this week we saw more than the horse trainer we've known. We saw a man who stood shoulder to shoulder with a woman the outside world says he shouldn't even stand near. We saw a heart ready to break and mend for his people. He lifted his hand and placed it flat over his chest. You two fought for us as one heart, he said, and a hush dropped over the crowd like a heavy blanket. Because of that, many of our little ones will chase fireflies next summer. Many of our elders will sit by the flames again, telling the old stories that keep our hearts strong. For a long breath, nobody moved. Then, slow as sunrise, the people began to clap. It started small, just a few palms meeting in the quiet. Then more joined. Then more still, until the sound swelled into one steady, living heartbeat rolling through the night, grateful and fierce. Wren's eyes filled fast. She didn't even try to hide the tears that spilled over. Talon had to turn his head away. The feeling swelling in his chest was too big, too raw to meet head-on all at once. He had never chased honor, never wanted eyes on him. Yet standing there, honored shoulder to shoulder with her, something powerful took root deep inside. Not exactly pride, something quieter, truer, belonging. In the days that followed, word spread like wildfire on dry grass. Tales rode the trading trails, drifted down dusty main streets, even reached the mercantile that had once shut its door in their faces. They stood with the sick 6 days and 6 nights straight. She never once left their side. He carried an old man 3 miles through deep snow on his own back. They saved half the settlement with nothing but grit and bare hands, the same mouths that once hissed, "That nurse is living with that Apache man," now spoke softer. "Maybe we had it wrong," some muttered under their breath. "Maybe there's more to them than we figured." Respect, slow, cautious, hard-earned, began to crowd out the gossip. And at the heart of it all stood Talon Blackthorn and Wren Calder, changed, standing closer than ever before. No longer bound only by shared sorrow, but by the lives they'd fought for and the courage they'd kindled in one another. Spring didn't roar into Willow Canyon. It stole in gentle, the way a stranger knocks on a cabin door not sure anyone will answer. First came the patient drip of melting icicles along the eaves of Talon's place. Then a patch of dark earth showed beneath the cottonwoods. Then bees appeared, humming low and careful, testing the new warmth like travelers sniffing the wind. And one bright morning the whole valley drew a deep breath again. Snow had retreated to thin patches. The creek found its voice, singing over stones. Horses kicked and galloped in the softening pasture, full of fresh life. That same morning Talon appeared at Wren's door. His coat hung loose in the mild air. "Come with me," he said. No explanation, no destination, just a quiet certainty in his voice that told her this mattered. Wren pulled a shawl around her shoulders and followed him up the narrow trail that climbed the ridge above the settlement. The walk was easy. Morning sun warmed their backs. A light breeze carried the green promise of new grass. For the first time in weeks, she realized she wasn't shivering. Not from cold, not from fear. When they reached the high point, Talon stepped aside so she could stand at the overlook. Wren caught her breath. Below them, Willow Canyon lay wide awake and alive. Smoke rose thin and peaceful from cook fires. Children raced along the riverbank, laughter drifting up like music. Women shook quilts out in the sunlight. Even the horses gleamed, coats shining copper and bay in the gold morning light. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Talon gave a single nod, standing a half step behind her. "Always has been. I just forgot how to look for a while." Ren turned to him, soft. "Grief has a way of shrinking the world down small." He reached inside his coat and brought out something wrapped in a strip of soft leather. Careful fingers unfolded it. In his palm lay a small wooden carving, smooth, warm from his touch, shaped from juniper. Two birds side by side, wings spread wide. Ren's breath caught sharp. "I made this for you," Talon said quiet. "Took most of the winter." She lifted it in both hands, fingertips tracing the careful sweep of wings. Her fingertips followed the smooth curve of the wings, gentle as a whisper. "They're beautiful," she breathed. "What do they stand for?" Talon turned his gaze out over the valley, as though the right words might be waiting on the far horizon. "When Sparrow passed," he started, voice soft and rough at the same time, "I figured my heart was done. Finished." He swallowed hard, throat working. "But Ren, you got it beating again." A hush settled between them. Not hollow, but rich and full, the kind of quiet that holds truth too big for words. "I never saw it coming," he went on, low. "Never asked for it. But somewhere in those long, dark nights and freezing dawns, between nursing the sick and fighting for every breath, you turned into the person I look for first. The one I need." Warmth bloomed behind Ren's eyes. Not grief this time, but something clear and bright, like recognition after a long search. She stepped closer, the carving still cradled safe in her palms. "I didn't heal you, Talon," she whispered. "We healed each other." He looked at her. Really looked. The old shadow of fear, the worry that letting someone new in would erase what he'd lost, was gone. In its place came a softening, a quiet opening to the possibility of carrying fresh love right alongside the old. A warm breeze swept past them, gentle as a promise. Right there on the ridge above the valley they'd fought to save, Talon reached for her. He paused, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. Their first kiss wasn't hungry or hurried. It was soft, careful. A shared breath between two people discovering their hearts still had space to grow. A kiss born of thankfulness, of mending, of spring finally thawing two lives that had nearly frozen solid. Ren rested her forehead against his, light as a sigh. "I'm here," she whispered. Talon closed his eyes, letting the truth sink in like warm sunlight after endless winter. "I know," he said. For the first time in years, he believed it. He wasn't walking the trail alone anymore. In the days that followed, spring tightened its grip on Willow Canyon. The river ran bright and fast under the sun, sweeping winter's last ice downstream. Wildflowers broke through the softening earth, small, tough blooms streaking color across the valley floor like spilled paint. One evening, as the sky burned gold and lavender, Talon and Ren walked hand in hand to the very edge of the ridge. Their shadows stretched long behind them across the warm grass. From up here, Willow Canyon looked reborn. Below, horses thundered across open pasture, manes whipping like flags of freedom. Children dashed along the riverbank, laughter rising clear and bright as families built their first spring fires. Smoke curled upward in lazy ribbons, carrying the clean scent of cedar and new beginnings. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stood. Two lives once scarred deep by loss, now bound by something steadier than fear, and kinder than chance. The wind brushed around them, warm for the first time in months. Wren leaned into Talon's side. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, holding her close as natural as breathing. Some hearts shatter. Some hearts ice over. But once in a great while, two battered souls cross paths in the dead of winter and choose to stand up together. When spring finally arrives, the valley glows in the last light of day, a living proof of everything they endured and everything they'll build from here. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. We appreciate you more than you think. If this tale stirred something deep inside, we invite you to remain part of this frontier of memories. More true stories of honor, compassion, and destiny are waiting for you here. Subscribe, share, comment, and thank you for riding with us today. Aviso Legal Bara Disclaimer. Our content is designed for artistic and entertainment purposes and may reinterpret historical themes using fictional touches. We apply AI tools thoughtfully, only to support production, while keeping human supervision over editing, emotional tone, and narrative coherence. We always comply with regulatory guidelines for AI-based media and avoid deepfake practices or identity manipulation. All supporting components remain legally sourced. Please ask for authorization before sharing or adapting any segment. Your respect makes it possible for us to continue telling meaningful stories.